Jesus said there would be wars, earthquakes, famine, and pestilence, that nation would rise against nation. There would be false Christs, signs in the heavens, and the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. The sun would be darkened, and the moon would not give its light. Men's hearts would fail them for fear. The destruction of Damascus, Gog and Magog, the rapture, the man of sin, Armageddon, nuclear war, destruction of society, genetic engineering, transhumanism, the UFO phenomena, global government, universal church, and doctrines of demons. Enter the realm of Last Days. We invite you to another exciting episode of Last Days broadcast, where we will examine current events in light of God's prophetic word. And now your host, Pastor Jerry.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Last Days broadcast. I'm your host, Pastor Jerry. We're glad that you could tune in and be with us this evening. Well, we have a really special show for you tonight. We have with us on the line Mr. Joe Ardis from over at SurvivorMall.com. You'll recognize his voice on our new intro that we've been doing since January. Joe is a man of many talents. He's was kind enough to work with us on that project, gave us the intro and the exit theme that we have for our particular show. And Joe, good to have you with us.
Good to be here, Pastor Jerry. Thank you so much.
We're so glad you could be here. You are a man of multiple talents. Not only do you do voiceover work, and you've done a lot of things with the music business, but you also are the products manager over at SurvivorMall.com, the man that makes everything happen. When an order is placed, you see to it that the good folks get the order they put in. And Joe, we're going to be doing a show here, and that's why you're here, obviously, with us, sure, on survival preparedness. And I like to make this statement to our listeners out there. Again, whatever your religious beliefs are concerning the time of the end or the end times, and whether it's pre, mid, or post, or maybe none of the above, I do believe that it's important to be prepared for whatever we can prepare ourselves for. Obviously, none of us know exactly what's going on in the world that we live in, and I'm not going to tie God in with disasters and different things. We'll let some of the other theologians do that, but we do see, Joe, an escalation of events taking place over the last few years in our world that you'd have to be blind, deaf, and dumb not to see going on. I mean, I'm talking about, earthquakes. We've had more earthquakes in the last few years than I've ever seen. Flooding in the South going on even as we speak. We see tornadoes throughout the Midwest and the South here in the United States. Record snowfalls in the winter. Power outages. We're all of us here are in a particular place where there could actually be an economic meltdown in our country. The specter of war in the Middle East, the oil situation, the gas prices, terrorism, and, the threat of an EMP attack. I mean, we live in a volatile world, aren't we?
Yeah. Actually, I have felt for a while that we're kind of living on borrowed time. Many of the professionals that we're informed at Survivor Mall through have speculated that they feel that they're shocked. Actually, they feel that we're not that they're advocating for an act of terror by any means, but they're just astonished that we haven't seen something sooner than it developed since 9/11. They're just shocked that we've made it this far without something else like that, and we're basically living on borrowed time. And I don't say that to be apocalyptic. I just mean that there are those of us like yourself, you and I have shared privately, that look at the world and we see the financial institutions, the banking systems, social security, the decay in our political systems, and it's quite astonishing. And many feel, as you and I have discussed privately, that we may be headed towards some very prophetic times, and the need to be prepared to be able to take care of your children and your families. I don't think there's ever been a time, certainly in my lifetime, where it seems to be more in your face. The pressing need to get prepared.
Absolutely. We wholeheartedly concur on this end. And you know, I don't know about you, and we won't get into the semantics of it, but as a pastor, as a leader in the evangelical community, you know, I get often, and it's a product of our theology, I'm sorry to say, but a lot of Christians, particularly those who, like myself, hold a premillennial viewpoint, tend to believe somehow that because there's a rapture that's coming, or God will remove the church at some point, and really we don't know exactly when that will happen, that somehow I don't need to prepare for anything. And that attitude, it just boggles my mind, and it's something that, you know, I try to cut through that, because, you know, none of us know how long we'll be here as believers or Christians, or when these events will take place. So, you know, somehow we're living in an anomalous bubble here in the United States. In other words, we're not like everyone else in the world. You know, the church has not experienced difficulties that much of the world for 1900 years has experienced already. And again, that's an anomaly. I do believe that we could see hard times, difficult times, and certainly I had a cousin that went through Katrina down in the South, and we need to learn from these experiences. And over the last few years, I've been preparing myself, me and my wife, my children, for things that could happen, that are possibilities. And I know one of the things, and that's what we're going to talk about in this particular program, and I appreciate you agreeing to be on next week's show as well. We're going to continue that, but this week we want to talk about, you know, 72-hour bags, or kits that can be kept at home in case something like a disaster struck. Maybe the power is to go out for several days, or weather related, or God forbid a terrorist attack. Joe, what is a bug out bag? That's a terminology a lot of our listeners have really never heard before. Could you explain that?
Sure, you bet. Well, there's a lot of different ways to call it. Some people refer to these bags as a walk-out bag, a carry-out bag, a grab-and-go bucket. They get tagged all kinds of things, and if you go online and just type in keywords like preparedness or survival kits, you'll see that there's dozens of retailers and things like this that have their own variation of a grab-and-go kit. But the idea behind a grab-and-go kit, label it what you may, is there are times where an individual may decide that it best fits their particular emergency or scenario to shelter in place, meaning that they've decided that the roads are congested, or maybe maybe there's nuclear fallout traveling throughout the air, and they're being informed through their localist television and radio stations not to try to leave the house, that it's better to try to shelter in place. Well, those elements are a little bit different. Those are the more kind of a long-term storage type plan, where you look at your landscape, whether it be your basement or your attic, or wherever you think that it would be ideal to try and shelter in place for a number of days or weeks, until either the atmosphere becomes safe to re-inhabit or until you're evacuated. People, though, I should highly recommend not expect. I would suspect that you need to try and be prepared on your own. What we've seen with Hurricane Katrina, and not to continue to throw stones at an old argument, but we've seen this again and again, where we've had either disasters or storms or incoming elements that people did not expect, who were relying on agencies like FEMA to float out of the sky, come in with all of their tricks, and basically take care of them, and they've found that they've been left wanting. It's a terrible idea to rely on anybody but yourself to take care of you.
Absolutely.
In times like that.
And obviously that's what we're trying to talk about here today, is not to necessarily rely. Thank God for the government, for help, but we can't necessarily trust they'll be there when we need them. So obviously we need to be prepared ourselves. Joe, before I lose my train of thought, I did want to ask you about the earthquake that took place in Japan with the resulting tsunami, the nuclear meltdown at the Fukushima reactors, and of course I believe that's still open-ended. It's still going on. What was the reaction you got over at Survivor Mall as it relates to like potassium iodine and things like that? Did you guys see an escalation of that during that time?
Absolutely. In fact, here in a minute I'll share with you and your listeners some things that they may not be aware of in terms of nationwide demand and some of the shortages that are still ongoing that we're seeing in the survival preparedness industry. But before I do that, I want to leave your listeners with some closure to the first question that you asked me regarding the grab and go bucket. So when you're not talking about this idea that you're going to need to come up with a way to eat and to drink water for an extended period of days to weeks within your home, there may be times, where your local television and radio stations are saying, there's a tornado incoming, here's a particular city, we expect this is going to be 8 hours from now, it's going to be disastrous. Well, those might be circumstances where you do want to grab and go and try along the way via cell phone, etc., to try and find a place to stay. But in the meantime, if you've got your grab and go kit, the idea is that you could basically live out of your backpack, the things that you've got in your grab and go kit, and those things might include. And it's funny because a lot of people, just some of the most basic things, either people forget or they overlook. Things like thermal blankets. At Survivor Mall, we have thermal blankets that are so inexpensive, and so many of the fundamentals are just not expensive. We have thermal blankets that will keep your body warm up to 20 degrees below zero with varying wind conditions that are like $1, $1.50, $1.99, something like that.
Now those are like the almost like a plastic type material, if I'm not mistaken, that fold up real small.
Yes, it actually looks like tinfoil, but actually if you try to stretch it, it's very hard to tear. It's paper thin. It looks like tinfoil, but it's a plastic. If you pull real hard, you can even begin to see through it.
Okay.
But we have emergency kits at Survivor Mall that have calorie bars, mainstay calorie bars that are set up in terms of, a one-person 3-day kit or a 6-person 6-day kit, and you can certainly look at all those options. But they all come with the fundamentals: food, U.S. Coast Guard approved emergency water packets, so that you have something to drink. And one really nice thing about water packets is that in case of a nuclear emergency, you may not be able to rely on your water filtration tablets in the same way that you might if you were taking water from, let's say, a stream. Your military issue water purification tablet is going to filter things like parasites, molds, algae, things like that. You can even disinfect water that you would take out of a stagnant pond. Okay?
In other words, it's not meant for a nuclear radiation or anything like that.
But radiation supersedes that. We don't know that your water purification tablets are going to deal with things with like unknown chemical agents and things like this. And so that would be a perfect scenario in which you would want a sealed form of water, something that hasn't been exposed to the air. So all of our kits have sealed, U.S. Coast Guard approved 7-year storage water. Tube tents, these are fantastic for, we're stuck on the side of the road. All the freeways from here to Manhattan are totally congested, and yet it's raining outside, and we're, 2 miles from the car because we hiked up the road and went seeking shelter and everything's jammed. We're going to stay outside tonight. Just a really fast way to make a triangular-shaped, waterproof, it's a temporary shelter to stay out of the rain and the elements. Waterproof matches. These are almost, you're talking about pennies here.
Absolutely.
To buy wind and waterproof matches. These are also in our grab-and-go kits. And you just can't even, most of the long-term storage long-term storage foods that people are preparing, and even some of the MREs that people have been purchasing in case they need to grab and go, are heated with fire. And you would be shocked at how many folks purchase long-term storage foods or MREs or grab-and-go food elements, single, double serves, and things like this, and they forget whilst traveling that they're going to need purified water to rehydrate the food, and also a way to heat it up if that's something that they want to do.
Absolutely.
So we have kits. Now there's dozens and dozens of products in our kits that I won't take the time to elaborate on right now, but all of our kits are going to say right on them, this is a 3-day kit for 3 individuals or a 6-day kit for 4 individuals. These are small, they're lightweight, easy to carry. You can put them in your car, store them at your home.
That is important. The weight is important, isn't it, Joe?
It is.
Unless you're an Olympic weightlifter. I don't know about any of our listeners or even yourself, Phil, on this matter, but I put my own pack together, and I tend to overpack. And, hey, it only weighs 70 pounds or 60 pounds.
Right.
You try walking with that, and unless you're in good shape physically, you're not going very far. But and getting back to 72-hour bags, we're not talking about taking everything with the kitchen sink. But really, Joe, what is it? Water's the number one important element for life.
It is.
Water.
It is. It is.
Ahead of food, in other words. And water that is contaminated is deadly. It is deadly.
Absolutely. Now you can carry everything else in your grab-and-go bag, but if you don't have a way to get water, and don't get me wrong, water purifiers are great. We've got Berkey water purifiers, we've got Aquamira water purifiers, and those will filter like in a situation like you have a power outage, okay, and you have no way to get water out of the well. Okay, if you've got water on hand, or if you can find a pond or a creek or even a mud puddle, you can take that water and run it through a Berkey or an Aquamira, and it's going to take out all your parasites, molds, algae, all your stagnant poisonous elements. And on the other side, you're going to get clean, healthy-to-drink water with all the minerals that are actually good for you. So there is a time and a place for those. The reason that our grab-and-go kits are sealed water is because, first of all, if you're on the go, the idea of trying to purify water is not convenient, difficult. And you don't know if you're going to have a water resource nearby. And then secondly, because we don't know what kind of elements are going to be floating around in the air, and these packets are sealed so they can be used immediately. So you'd, I guess, rank water number 1, correct? In our graph. Water.
And what would be number 2? Fire making? The ability to have matches that will work under different conditions, or
I would put waterproof matches in there with a lot of these accessories that come in there, like the emergency candles, nylon cords. First aid is important, but probably if I had to just say, okay, your absolute bread and butter top 4 products, and all of these are included, of course, in all of our emergency 6-day home kits and things like this, would be the water being number 1, and probably right below that would have to be the calorie bars. If you're on the go, you're going to need calories. And if you haven't had access to supermarkets, or if the supermarkets are out of food, having a way to put enough calories into your body to stay active, to stay on the move. And one of the great parts of these small calorie bars is they are loaded with very healthy calories, but they're very small. So you're not going to feel like you've gorged yourself. You're not going to feel like you've gone through an Oriental buffet for $6.99 and eaten 6 plates of food. But you're going to get enough calories to stay alive and keep moving. And then right below that, something else that a lot of people do think of is your hand crank generator, radio, flashlight, siren. Many of the ones that we have in our kits will also charge your cell phone. But mostly important about those is that they don't require batteries. If you're in a position where you're on the go, you can crank these with your hand, okay, and then you can still get updates from your local radio stations that should be broadcasting updates on the storm or update on the situation, or directing people to locations that are safe, schools that are open for families to come and gather, and things like this. So one really the first step, I think, Jerry, is for people to think of 2 scenarios in their home. One scenario is we are planning to shelter in place. Come up with a list as a family of reasons that you think you might need to shelter in place.
Absolutely.
And the second scenario would be what would we need on hand if we did have to make it to our aunt's house, who is, 100 miles from here? How would we get there? And what if we got stuck in between here and there? What would we need to shelter for a few days if we had to make this, the second half of the trip via foot or via bus because the roads are congested or what have you? Those are very important decisions to pre-plan, to decide whether a situation merits sheltering in place or actually being on the go and then getting the appropriate supplies.
Well, that's wonderful, Joe. We're going to take a break right now and go to commercial. When we come back, more with Joe Ardis.
Hi, my name is Spencer, and I podcast.
Hi, Spencer.
I produce several podcasts on a variety of subjects, from celebrity interviews, current events, and weird news stories. Some of the folks I've been fortunate to interview include Masi Oka and Greg Grunberg from Heroes, Colin Ferguson and Joe Morton from Eureka, and Josh Gates from Destination Truth. Another show I produce is Citizen Armed, or How I Stopped Worrying and Learned to Love My Gun. It's a show about self-defense, personal protection, products, and tactics. I do the show with some pretty incredible guys, a former Navy SEAL, law enforcement, and military personnel, real people who've been in life-and-death situations offering advice to the beginner or advanced shooter. I also produce a show called Conspiracy Theories Special Edition. It's a look at the paranormal, UFOs, the latest technology, and prophecy from a biblical perspective. Some of you are familiar with the 6-hour special I did with Tom Horn that's available on his website, RaidersNewsNetwork.com. You can find a link to my site, Spencer On Demand, on Raiders News Network, or just do a search on iTunes for Spencer On Demand. I hope you'll check out the shows and let me know what you think. Just follow the link on RaidersNewsNetwork.com or search iTunes for Spencer On Demand.
Multimedia Productions has the flexibility to offer a wide variety of post-production services for delivery of your video for sales, marketing, and complex interactive training modules. We provide various approaches to capture the spirit and content of your event. Please contact us today to begin planning of your event's coverage that will meet your budget, have lasting impact, and leave memorable impressions. Our website is multi-media.com. That's www.multeye-media.com.
We now return to the last day's broadcast. Here is Pastor Jerry.
Well, we're back in the studio with Joe Ardis. Joe, thanks again for being with us and giving us these great tips. And I did have a question for you. I wanted to ask you, as we've been talking about 72-hour bags and or 72-hour kits in case, during a disaster scenario, one had to leave where they were at to find shelter elsewhere. What about the concept or the idea of a get-home bag? In other words, I'm a commuter. I work 50, 60 miles from home, and an EMP takes place, and I can't get in my car and drive home. How do I get home? Personally, in my personal life, I carry a get-home bag with very similar items in it. Do you have any requests for that? Do you ever hear talk of that?
Well, if I'm understanding the question correctly, what we have at Survivor Mall is two styles of kits. The contents are identical. So if you purchase a 6-day home kit for 6 adults,
okay,
we have the same kit available in what's called the cart kit. It's that simple. So and it comes in an easier to carry, and instead of a duffel bag, it comes in a backpack or a series of 2 backpacks, depending on the size. And this is something you can throw over your shoulder or even keep in your car. So yeah, just very simply, the same kits that we offer for home use are also available for car use. You can put these anywhere, though, Jerry. You can keep them at your home office, or take them to school with you, or wherever. If you're in college, you can leave these in your locker, wherever's handy for you.
So they're not overly large; they're manageable, and you can keep them with you wherever you happen to be at. And that's a good thing to know, And I have a measure of comfort from that, knowing that I have with me things that are items that I would need in case of an emergency. And I wanted to ask you about this as well, and again, let me go back. We talked about Fukushima. I mentioned that earlier in the broadcast, and I interrupted you kind of during a train of thought there. But did you guys get a big reaction over there from that? with the potassium iodide, and is it still ongoing? What's happening with that situation?
Yes. Something that your listeners may not be aware of, and actually this tends to be a trend here in the U.S., for as long as we've been in the survival industry. And when I say in the survival industry, I don't mean just the consumers that we deal with at Survivor Mall. We're very connected to some of the nation's largest manufacturers. So we're not the third man down the food chain. We are actually the distributor for many of the largest manufacturers for preparedness type supplies in the U.S. And so we're able to contact these people and deal with the CEOs and the managers and ask them very pointed questions about what they're seeing in terms of shifts in the industry, regarding American consumers. And one of the things that we've seen in terms of trends that seems to be a little bit dangerous here in the United States, and this goes all the way back to post 9/11, okay, is that in the U.S. there seems to be a lethargy amongst Americans in terms of becoming proactive about being prepared. And I don't know, you mentioned this earlier, I don't know if this comes from a mentality of being insulated from hazard or insulated from, talk about the global super financial meltdown that may be coming or what have you. I don't know if it's a mentality, like you mentioned, some of the evangelical people that you've come in contact with, and we've seen this when we've represented Survivor Mall at expos and things. People coming by the booth and they'll say, particularly in Christians, will say things like, well, I don't need to worry about being prepared because, the Lord's going to take care of all my needs. And you and I both know that He does take care of our needs.
Yes.
But He also gives us wisdom to also take responsibility for ourselves. If He gives you the resources to be prepared, there's wisdom in taking those steps to think about your kids and to make sure. I mean, when you go to work, Jerry, what are you doing? You're trying to secure income that is eventually going to turn around into resources because you need to eat and you've got a family to take care of.
Absolutely.
Why would you go to work
if you didn't have to?
So it isn't about faith in God. It's about doing the smart thing for your family. And one of the trends that we've seen here in the U.S. is like I said, it's kind of a lethargy or a kind of a dismissive attitude, and it's getting better. It's getting better. Sadly, it's taken some pretty scary events to improve the mentality here. I think people are feeling less invincible than they used to.
I hear you.
But here, if your listeners didn't take anything away from what we've discussed at all except for this would probably be the most important thing I would say today. Following 9/11, the manufacturers for things like mainstay calorie bars, long-term storage, food and water of all types, these manufacturers on selected products were back ordered for 7 months.
Mercy. Oh.
7 months. Following Hurricane Katrina, various manufacturers for water purification tablets and things like that were back ordered from 3 to 6 months. And now with Fukushima, here about, is it 6 weeks ago, six and a half weeks ago?
You're right.
Right about six and a half weeks ago. And this wasn't even in the United States. This was just our media covering a devastating event in Japan. But U.S. consumers, and when I say consumers, I mean probably 3% of the population, and that's all it takes to create a shortage on some of these products. 3 to 5% of the population wakes up the same day watching the same headlines on the news, and all of them that day going, hey, we've got to scramble to get online to get the same products that everybody else waking up is trying to procure the same day. And what happens is, like at Survivor Mall, we do an extremely high volume of units in terms of things like potassium iodide, long-term storage foods, and something your listeners may not be aware of unless they tried to get something like potassium iodide, which, by the way, for those listening that are not sure what that is, it's an element that you can take that helps protect your thyroid from external radiation exposure. So it's highly recommended, the government recommend that you take the appropriate dose in terms of, in times of, potential exposure to radiation.
Absolutely.
It will help greatly reduce the likelihood that you'll see long-term damage done to your body as a result of having been exposed to minor levels of toxins traveling through the air and microparticles of nuclear fallout.
That is an item I personally keep in my own medicine cabinet for that particular type of an event. Hopefully it doesn't happen, but if it were to happen, of course we are exposed to radiation. We don't know what the levels will be during a disaster, if you or I were living over there, but the time to buy it, in other words, is not when the disaster hits. It's beforehand. And I had mine in the cabinet well before Fukushima took place, and that goes for every one of the items we're talking about: water, MREs, and so forth. You don't want to go buy MREs after a flood or after a hurricane.
People in the United States, and when I say people, this doesn't include everyone, but it does seem to me, in my opinion, to be a large number of the populace, have this idea that the federal government has millions of units of whatever it is that they need stored somewhere in a vault by the trainload that can be delivered to local cities if they should need it. And there are some organizations within the government that do have some access to resources, but here's what happened with Fukushima. One day, as the United States, we had so many millions of these oral pills that you can take by various manufacturers: potassium iodide, Dirosafe, Pro-KI. All of these pills were requisitioned by the government and sent to Japan. This is at least what we were being told by the manufacturers.
I hear you.
The reason that they don't make, 20 billion tablets and leave them sitting in a vault is because all of this stuff is required by the FDA to have an expiration date. This is going to be true for water or MREs or anything else. So they're only going to make enough to fulfill orders for what they view as a foreseeable quarter of the year. When a disaster hits, you will not be able to go online that day, unless you're in the first 1% of the country that was there fast enough. You are not going to get product, and that is what I would leave your listeners with if they haven't heard me say anything else. And we've seen this time and time again. When you have nationwide panic for the same products, if that's the day that you get up and say, "Hey man, oh my goodness, I've got little kids, boy, this is really fascinating, I got to get this stuff," unfortunately, you will not get product unless, like I said, unless you're in the top 1% of the population.
In the front, So that's a good thing, ladies and gentlemen, to bear in mind with this show that we're doing. Make sure you have your supplies in advance. In other words, if you do not have a 72-hour kit, if you do not have the water supply, the purification tablets, iodine tablets, whatever you believe or think you'll need during any type of a disaster, and we talked about many of the ones that could take place, you need to go out and get it now. You need to make preparation now while you can. I think about the flood victims. They just flooded the plains down there in the Southland to keep New Orleans from being overrun. Now, what if you were one of the ones living in that area and you had to evacuate your home within hours? You're notified you've got to leave. It'd be a wise thing to have a 72-hour bag, to be able to put that in your vehicle, to have something to get you from point A to point B. And that's really what we're talking about here, Joe, is getting from point A to point B.
Right. And some of these situations are completely avoidable. And I say this with all the respect for the people that have suffered in places like New Orleans as a result of Katrina. Okay, this is not a statement that's meant to be jabby at people for not having been prepared. Because let's face it, I'm guilty. I'm guilty of putting preparedness off way too long.
I think we all probably could say that. I agree. We could all say that, but we need to take these lessons, these hard lessons,
right,
to heart and take action. Learn from it. Amen. Amen, brother.
With Hurricane Katrina, and this has been a brand in my mind since this event happened. The devastating loss of the number of people that died sitting on the top of their roof because they did not have clean water to drink. If they had had just a couple of basic, incredibly inexpensive things like a thermal blanket and, more importantly, water purification tablets, and just go to Walmart and get a sports bottle and a way to purify water for less than $20, these people could have made 25 quarts. We have at Survivor Mall, we have a product called Aquamira potable water tablets. These are droplets, and one bottle is like $9.99 retail. It will purify 25 quarts of water, and so you're in a situation where all of the water. This was not nuclear waste. Okay, it was mostly sewage and things. From what I understand, it was mostly sewage, and it was contaminated by the gutters and the sewers. Those are things that a small water purification tablet would have killed: bacteria, parasites. And yes, the idea of drinking it is disgusting. But if it's either that or not have anything to drink, I think I'm going to choose life. There are things that people can do, and one of the things that we hear a lot at these expos and stuff, people just have this assumption that being prepared for a lot of this stuff is just super expensive.
That's it.
And we get that reception. I told you that privately the other day, Pastor Jerry. A lot of people simply they're overwhelmed before they even get started. They don't even bother looking into it because their initial reaction is, well, I don't have $10,000 sitting around to get prepared. And
we know it's not that much. It really isn't.
Oh, it's really not. It's really there's so much of this stuff is really, really inexpensive.
Basics.
It would probably shock people at how some of the most important things are just a few bucks or pennies on the dollar, and that's not a sales pitch. I'm just trying to encourage. And by the way, at Survivor Mall, I want everybody listening to this broadcast to know we have a lot of free material for download at Survivor Mall, and we want people to have it. This is valuable information, and you can find it if you can find it from the front page of Survivor Mall. There's a link on the left-hand side called Free Downloads, something like 13 entire manual-sized documents that are all about sheltering in place and how to go about making decisions in terms of what to get for your long-term storage food kits, or whether you're going to buy a grab-and-go bucket. Information on FEMA, natural disasters, how to use different supplies, how to live off-grid, all kinds of stuff, absolutely free. And we offer that all year round. It's not a special promo. This is something that anybody going to Survivor Mall can find, and it's because we want them to have this information.
Well, that's wonderful, Joe. And Joe, look, we've run out of time for this broadcast. We appreciate you coming on and being with us. And you've given us a whole lot of great information, Joe. Thank you so much for being with us, my brother. And we'll see you next week. Ladies and gentlemen, until then, may the Lord richly bless you.
Thank you for listening to our broadcast. Pastor Jerry welcomes your correspondence. You can email your comments, questions, and prayer requests to him at lowercase jcarrickzilla@gmail.com. That's jcarrickzilla@gmail.com. Until our next broadcast, we'll see you there or in the air.